Carol Goldberg, you are Distinguished Research Professor of Law and Jonathan D. Varat, Distinguished Professor of Law, Emerita. Thank you for accepting this invitation from the Center for Medieval and Renaissance Studies to reflect on the extraordinary year 2020 that is now behind us, thankfully, even if its effects are still with us. This interview is part of the CMRS op-ed and podcast series on the intersections between current events and our research and the state of our fields. This winter, we are focusing on colonization of the Americas and its effects on indigenous populations and communities. In previous podcasts and op-eds, we have observed disruptions and continued effects of colonization and missionization, namely the loss of agency in history, not just loss of indigenous lands. In your forthcoming book, co-authored with Duane Champagne on a coalition of lineages, the Fernandeño Tataviam Band of Mission Indians, you begin with the period before colonization, then you study colonization under the Spanish, and missionization of indigenous California tribes. But you follow the continuities of indigenous form of social organization and culture beyond missionization. So could you give us some example of these continuities, since they will be an informative contrast to the disruptions that we've heard about in previous podcasts?
Thank you so much for inviting me to participate through this podcast. Our book is looking at a number of groups whose ancestral territory is in the greater San Fernando and Santa Clarita valleys of Southern California today. We've been working with the Fernandeño Tataviam Band of Mission Indians on their efforts to achieve federal recognition. And our historical research took us back to the settlements that existed in the Southern California area before arrival of the Spanish. These were a large number, hundreds of autonomous villages, maybe size of 200 to 400 or 500 at most, centered at locations where there was good water, springs or other good water sources. And each one of these villages was the site of an autonomous lineage. So these were people who could trace their ancestry to a common ancestor. They would intermarry, of course, with other villages, but each village lineage had a distinct identity. It had a distinct polity. So its leadership was within the lineage, usually an elder. In the villages that were matrilineal, these would be elder women typically. In the villages that were patrilineal, they would be male elders, but each village politically and socially autonomous, interacting with others in the area. So they would join together for ceremonies, for marriages, for trade, but each understood that the other could not be coerced or forced into some large central organization. So if you're looking for a big tribe in Southern California, you won't find one. Now, the continuity you asked about is what happened to these autonomous lineages when they were forced into the mission, beginning with the establishment of Mission San Fernando in 1797. Well, keep in mind that this mission was in active operation for less than 50 years. It was one of the last missions. So the impact it was going to have on the people there was not going to be the impact of centuries. These individuals who came from their villages with their lineage identities identified their villages in the mission records when they were baptized. They maintained those even though they were dispossessed from the lands on which those villages had existed. But they maintained an adherence to their belief systems, to their ceremonies, to the understanding of who were their leaders. The Spanish translated it as captains throughout the mission period. And one of the foremost goals of our book is to document how these lineage identifications persisted even as all these folks from different villages came together. They came to see themselves as having had a common experience at this mission. They even called themselves Fernandeños. You see that word in the title of the tribe today. But they did not abandon this understanding of themselves as part of kinship lineages. And that's the continuity that we're emphasizing.
Thank you so much for giving such a broad overview and that really focuses on the question of lineage through time. And it gives, I think, really an excellent idea to our viewers of the challenges that were facing the tribes, of how they were forced to make a community while keeping their own community, while they're undergoing these profound transformations in their way of life. Would you be able perhaps to share one more specific example of resilience of communities?
Yes, I'm happy to share that, because what we have seen is that from the very earliest times before the Spanish, these lineages came together on a consensual basis. And they had to do a lot of adapting through the period of the missions. The economy was changing, their land was lost to them. Much of their language was lost to them, although not entirely. Healing practices certainly remained, but the resilience can be found in the ways that they sustained their lineage communities. Often it was done in the face of a very different market economy by using first Mexican, then American holidays to come together as lineage families. And at these holiday celebrations that would take place when they were off from work, they would carry on lineage business. They would make collective decisions. One of the things we document at some great length is how, when a law was passed by the US Congress in 1928, allowing for California Indians to make claims for money based on the loss of lands that were promised in treaties that were never ratified. These lineages came together to decide collectively, each one separately, whether they would participate in this claims process. There was a lot of fear at that time that if they came forward, identified themselves as California Indians, they would be displaced from their ancestral lands and sent to reservations that were far away. So some of the lineages decided that they were not going to participate. Others, because it was the Depression and there was a need for some economic relief, decided collectively that they would participate. And you can really observe the autonomy of these lineages during this period of the 20th century coming together. And now today, with the Fernandeño Tataviam Band of Mission Indians, what you see is a voluntary coalition of these lineages choosing to come together to achieve federal recognition and to create at the same time a nonprofit organization that provides economic benefits in the form of scholarships and food aid, whatever people need in these times. So it's really a very powerful demonstration of resilience.
Thank you for sharing this with us and for sharing your work with us. I wanted to ask you one last question that I've been asking all of our guests. And that is, over such a long period of time and with the distant past of colonization, do you see links between what was going on then and what is going on today?
I do see links, very much so. And part of the effort of achieving federal recognition is to demonstrate to the satisfaction of a whole bureaucracy in Washington, D.C., that the social and political continuity, in fact, have occurred. Yes, there was displacement and dispossession from lands, but there is definitely a return of the people of the Fernandeño Tataviam band of Mission Indians to ceremonies, to songs like bird songs, to participation as a collective together, as a consensual coalition of lineages for their common benefit. Back then it was ceremonies. Today, most of them participate in Catholic ceremonies, even though they also observe many of the ceremonies from their indigenous traditions. They have found a way to be both their lineages and Fernandeño. The federal government is asking them, are you the same tribe you were then? And of course, there had to be many adaptations between then and now, but it is recognizable.
Thank you to our listeners and viewers, and congratulations, Carol Goldberg, on the forthcoming publication of your book with Dwayne Champagne, coming out in April, A Coalition of Lineages, the Fernandeño Tataviam Band of Mission Indians, coming out from the University of Arizona Press. And thank you once more for sharing your knowledge with us.
My pleasure.